This is Nicholas Alexiou from the Hellenic American Project and the Department of Sociology, Queen's College, CUNY. And today, in the series of oral history archives, we are very honored and very pleased and happy to have an interview with a very well-known person to both the Greek American community and to the American community in general, Ms. ANTHOULA Katsimatidis, who has many titles, but I will focus to just few of them, as an actress and as a producer, as a person of the theater, and I would like to thank you very much that you were so kind to accept our invitation and participate to the Oral History Archives of Queen's College. Welcome to the Hellenic American Project and Queen's College,
Thank you,
ANTHOULA.
Nico. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
And let's start with the personal and the family biographical sketches.
Sure.
Let's start by stating your name.
Yes.
And the place where you were born and the roots of the family.
My name is ANTHOULA Katsimatidis. That's the Greek way of saying it. The American way of saying it is ANTHOULA Katsimatidis. It's funny because people ask me all the time, like, is there a different way of saying that? Can I call you something else? Can I call you Anne? And I always say no, because my name is not Anne. It's ANTHOULA. And they figure it out. I was born in Astoria, Queens, New York, in 1972, giving my age there.
I never asked for it.
I know. And it was just a very different place then, growing up in Queens. I've never left. I'm still in Astoria. My parents are of Greek descent. They were both born on a very tiny island in Greece, in the Dodekanis, the group of 12 islands on the south east coast. And the island's name is Nisiros. Nisiros is a very tiny island that currently might have about 1,000 inhabitants, just to give you an idea of how tiny it is. I believe when my parents were born, it was very different. They grew up incredibly poor, and like most immigrants, they came to the United States for a better life. I believe it was my mom's father, my Papu Yanni, who came here first, and he worked as a busboy at the Plaza Hotel.
Do you know which period he came? Before the war, after the war?
My mom was born in 1942, and she came here when she was 10, 1952. So my dad came my papu came probably around 1944, probably after the war, right? Or no, right during, before?
Yeah, the war ended in 1945.
So it was before it ended, he came.
And this is very interesting because a lot of people who came from the Dodekanis at that time, it was before the unification.
Yes. The unification was March 7th, what was that, 1947?
Yes,
right? Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, he definitely came before the unification. So I guess, at that time, we were when were we under Italian occupation? Wasn't that the time? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was very hard, obviously, for a man without knowledge of the English language or any particular kinds of skills and no money, to come and make that trip to Ellis Island. But he did it, and he persevered like a lot of Greek immigrants and other immigrants, and he worked as a busboy. He never actually even wanted to become a waiter, my mom told me years ago. He was very content being a busboy and made as much money as he could, worked as hard as he could, and after 8 years, sent for his wife and 3 children. And so my mom and her sister and brother and my grandmother came over, made that long trip. And I remember my mom telling me that the 3 of them were awfully sick, and my mother and my grandmother. They all were so sick, and they were stuck in the cabin just throwing up the whole time. It was an awful thing. And finally, one of the gentlemen who worked on the boat happened to be Greek and took care of them and gave them some kind of a medicine to help ease their stomachs. But she said that it was this strange experience. And they waited on the pier for my grandfather, and it just seemed like forever. And it turns out that my grandfather didn't recognize them because so many years had passed. And so they came here. My mom was 10 years old. She didn't speak the language. She quickly enrolled in elementary school, and so her first language was Greek, and learned. And they all grew up. They all lived in a tenement on the west side.
Yeah, because Astoria is a product of the second mass wave, the late 50s and 60s, when the Greeks lived.
Yeah, no, my mom grew up in Chelsea. Actually, she grew up in Chelsea because one of her aunts had come before my grandfather, or her uncles had come, and so they had this building that they rented, and each floor was reserved for a different family member, family.
And historically, we know that it was a very tough neighborhood.
Very tough neighborhood. My uncle says that, my mother's brother says that all the time, that they were gangs that would call the Greeks greasers and grease balls, and they would pick fights with them, and they weren't little fights. I mean, they were quite dangerous.
Well, you as a person of the theater and the movies and films, you know the West Side Story, which is exactly the epitome
of depicting the real immigrant story, right? I mean, it was scary enough to come, but then to come and not be welcomed was a completely different thing, which I guess is also continuing today, unfortunately.
And also, we can only imagine the cultural shock this generation.
How they experienced this shock. Yeah, and I think they must have been a very tough group of people to be able to endure not just the shock of this new environment, the tall buildings, the loud noise, the hustle and the bustle of the city, the incredibly hard work, but also being abused on a daily basis must have done something to their psyche. But that is really a testament to these people, because they put their heads down and they worked. And I'm very proud of that, because I would not be here today if it wasn't for my grandfather coming. And then, of course, my father came later. He was a seaman. And so he came on one of his long trips. He used to go all over the world. It was a cargo ship, of course. And he decided to jump ship because I think my grandmother insisted on it, his mother. She didn't want to lose her son to the seas. And she made him stay, and then she introduced him to my mother. So there was a bit of an arranged marriage there. Go on a date with him, go on a date with him. Just once, my son is a good man. And my mother agreed to go on a date, and the next day everyone heard that they were engaged. So it was sort of that kind of thing. Luckily, they grew to love each other, and they had 4 kids.
And at some point, the family moved to Astoria, where you were born and grew up. How was the environment at home? How Greek it was, how ethnic it was, the language, the food?
I don't think you could get more Greek in our household. So my dad only spoke Greek, and my mom was the American voice in the household, but she obviously spoke Greek. And for the most part, they both spoke Greek to their children. But because we also had to grow up in an American society, Mom was very quick to help us with our English homework and that sort of thing. But in the house, primarily, we spoke Greek. And my parents insisted on us going to Greek school. So it was all through elementary school. We would go after elementary school at 3 o'clock. We would rush over to the church and go to afternoon Greek school till 5:30. And then we'd come home and do all our American homework and our Greek homework. But that wasn't enough. My parents needed to make sure that we knew about Nisyros, specifically the island that they were born on. And so every Saturday, we would go to Greek school, Nisirian school, at the cultural house of the people from the island of Nisyros, which is something that we can talk about a little further to further explain what that means.
Which was in Astoria, right?
Which was in Astoria. Yeah. There were actually 3 buildings in Astoria that were purchased and owned by these societies, which were created by men at the time of Nisirian descent, representing their villages, their specific villages. Nisyros only had technically 3 or 4, but 3 villages. And so each village created their own society, which was really a safe house for everyone coming from the same place to kind of come together and find family and friends and camaraderie.
And learn about the history of the island, the customs.
Well, the kids ended up learning about not only, so we didn't only study, what was different from the afternoon Greek school was that we didn't just learn about our history and our religious item. We also learned specific things about the island of Nisyros. We learned about the customs and the traditions and the songs and the food and whatever was very specific to Nisyros. And so I often say to people that I grew up knowing Nisyros in my heart without ever having been there. I mean, truth be told, my parents did take us there when we were all children. I think I was 5, maybe I was 4 when I went to Nisyros for the first time. I don't have very many memories of that, obviously. So for me, it was like going to Nisyros for the first time when I was 19 years old. That's when I went to Greece.
After college?
After college, yeah. And I knew of Greece, of course, as a country, but for me, Nisyros was Greece, if anyone can really understand that, even though I knew about the War of 1821, I think I knew more about the Ensomatosis, which was the unification of the 12 islands with motherland Greece. Because I was also involved in the Canisian Society, which was the society that was created by members of all of the 12 islands. So we kind of had that camaraderie with the other islands. I often meet someone from another neighboring island and I say, oh, patriotimu, like he's my compatriot,
I would like to hear how you felt when you visited Nisyros at 19 years old, but also how you were received, because I understand a lot of people who were immigrated here, but also there was an indigenous population, and sometimes there is a distinction that, they're calling names like Americanakia or this and that, or it was a different reception.
I don't think it was an exception for me at 19 years old. First of all, my parents raised me to be so Greek, but when the time came for me to actually go to Nisyros specifically, my father was like, wait, what? Where are you going? No. I don't want you to go to Greece. I think he was worried about either losing me to Greece, or maybe it was the time where I would, fall in love with boys or whatever it was. But it was quite shocking that he put up such a fight for me to go to Greece.
Although all these years, the effort was that you become Greek.
Yes, that you marry Greek, that you speak Greek, that you learn Greek, that you love Greek. But when it was time to go to Greece, he didn't want me to go alone, which is such an irony, right? But that's also a kind of a commentary about how overprotective Greek fathers were, probably still are. So that was the first kind of challenge. And then, of course, I had to stay with my father's sister on the island so that they could watch over me like a hawk. And I got to meet all of these family members that, at the time, you couldn't FaceTime anyone. I didn't know who these people were. They came once, I think, in my 19 years. So I got to really, meet my father's sister and my first cousins, her children. The current mayor of Nisyros is my first cousin, Christopher Koroneos, and his sister, and their kids, So it was, just this concept of meeting the immediate family was then kind of, wait a second, but that's my uncle, and that's my aunt, and that's my cousin. Like, who are, it's such an extended family, that was something very interesting to me, because I knew my family to be here in New York, my second cousins and the like. But I loved the simplicity of the island, of course. I loved, the beauty of the island, and I loved meeting all these people. But I did get the sense that I was not an outsider, because they knew I was ANTHOULA Katsimatidis' daughter, so everyone was like, at attention, you know, taking care of me as best as they could. But then I was labeled, calato Americaniki. Like Americaniki is sort of like, oh, the little American who thinks she's Greek, you know, like. But I think I impressed them, and especially as the years went on, with my command of the Greek language, and my understanding of all things Greek, where they really started to appreciate the fact that, like, oh, this Americaniki actually knows her stuff, you know, and she's kind of really proud to be Greek. And, you know, I think we like this about her, because it's sort of a saying that, you know, the Greek Americans, the Greeks of the diaspora, are more Greek than the Greeks in Greece. And, you know, I think what they're saying is that because we have this nostalgia for our motherland, it kind of keeps us tied. So we're always trying to get more and more and kind of fill our bodies and souls up and our minds up with anything Greek, you know. And so that's why, you know, we're always trying to, like, go back and experience what it is to be Greek. Or my father would constantly contribute money to the churches and to the villages, and, you know, whatever he can do to kind of help the place that he was born in. You know, my mom the same. Like, and while I may not have been born in Greece, I have that, I guess, internal Greek. My roots are so rizomenes, they're so bonded with being Greek that I can't be any other way. You know, I feel it in my heart, in my soul, and I think that that's what, you know, has stopped Greeks from calling me an Americaniki. You know, now I think in today's generation, they probably just do it more in jest. But I think back then, when I was 19, it was probably really like, come on, kid, you know, who are you? You know, kind of thing. What kind of Greek are you?
How about the other side of the spectrum? How the American community received you when they knew of your ethnic background?
Yeah.
In schools, college,
school
or
was
before?
hard, you know. School was hard, even though I was born here. So it wasn't like Greek was my first language. American was my first language. English, I mean. I think I spoke Greek in the house, but I you know, English came easy to me. I was a smart student. My teachers loved me. They loved my parents, you know, because they were such good people, traditional, with core values, and cared about their children's academic success. I think, you know, as a child, and this continues to today, you know, when they're doing, you know, attendance and they stop at a name and, like, they slow down and try to pronounce it. It's like, here, you know, that must be me, you know, which I think happens a lot because of the difficulty in our names. But I think that even as a young child, people expected me to change my name, you know, for school. Like, can we call you Annie? Can we call you Ann? Is what I said originally. But I refused to have that happen. And quite honestly, my name did change from my baptized name. My baptismal name is my grandmother's name, because in Greek tradition, you often receive your grandparents' names. My name is Anthousa. And interestingly enough, in Nisiros, my relatives called me Anthousa. My mother will call me Anthousa, my father will call me Anthousa, my friends, my dearest friends today will call me Anthousa. But because I grew up with my grandmother in the same house, she was Yaya Anthousa and I was little Anthulitsa, Anthulaiki, Anthula, Gemina, and Anthula remained. But I've come to understand that they're two completely different names. Like, I know many Anthulas that have never been called Anthousa. And likewise, you know. So, but I was well received. You know, I was a very normal child growing up in the 80s, because children were very kind back then. And there were many immigrant children in my classroom. In other words, I didn't grow up in Greece where everyone is the same. You know, we grew up in America, in New York City, where everyone was different. They were all different types and sizes of children, varieties, colors of children. So I didn't have to deal with any kind of bullying or any kind of that, which is a good thing. I think today that seems to be very different. But I do remember as a child I wasn't allowed to do the things that other non-Greek kids were allowed to do. I wasn't allowed to go to sleepovers. I wasn't allowed to go to trips. I had to be very, very kind of protected.
This is a great story because your generation had, on one hand, the pressure to remain Greek, and at the same time, you're Americans of some ethnic background, and the balancing those.
But there was definitely a culture identity problem, an identity problem in general. Like, am I Greek? Am I American? And then you fuse the two, and hence you're Greek American. And I remember other kids would say, no, I'm American Greek, to kind of prove that they are American first, But, there was definitely that identity crisis because as I got older, I wanted to date boys, and my father would say, no, he can only be Greek. My friends were all Greek. And even in school, classmates were non-Greek, and my mom would feed them just as she would the Greek kids, My mom was very cool with all of my friends, whether they were Hispanic or Jewish or whatever. She loved everyone. So I was allowed to have those friends, of course. But as I got older, I seemed to kind of, gravitate towards the Greek friends. But when I dated non-Greek boys, my father would be furious. And then when I became 30 years old, my father said to me, you're not married yet? Okay, you can date Italian. It was almost like the Italians were acceptable because it was the same Mediterranean part of the world, and we had the same values. It was really funny.
But you can identify yourself in many different ways, I guess.
Yes. I mean, I think I like to say that I am a Greek American, born in New York, but proud to be an American, very proud to be an American. But my heart beats Greek, and the blood running through my veins is Greek.
You have seen Astoria in different times and periods and in different phases.
Yes.
So, what Astoria means to you, and also what Greece means to you, and if you ever thought to repatriate?
I think that's a very good question. Astoria, for me, if I had to say it in one word, Astoria means home. I was born at Astoria General Hospital. I've lived on 42nd Street on the other side of Astoria, and then I moved to the Ditmar side of Astoria. I've been in Astoria for 51 years, and people ask me all the time, you're still in Astoria? And I say, yeah. Why would I leave? I love Astoria. It's my home. It's where I've grown up. It's familiar. It's, it's Greek. It's very Greek. And you ask about the changes. So from in the 70s and the 80s and probably the early 90s, it was still extremely Greek, Italian, Irish. And then, it became a little more gentrified. And I don't mind the gentrification of Astoria. What I mind is the kind of how Astoria has changed in terms of, we used to know our neighbors. I still speak to my neighbors. It used to be a very warm neighborhood feel. And now they're building all these high rises and they're just packing in people and cars. And it's just becoming very loud and kind of not as quaint as it used to be because there's just too many people here. And what's interesting to note is that the Greek businesses have remained for the most part in Astoria, while people have moved out now towards Whitestone Bayside, sort of the Long Island area. But, you can still walk down the street and hear a full conversation in Greek, which is always kind of fun. And visit a Greek restaurant or a Greek cafe, but Astoria will always be home. Which is how I feel about Nisidos. Nisidos will always be my second home. Greece is my is where I've kind of it's my identity in terms of my roots, in terms of my my drive, my desire to succeed, my epimony, my persistence. It is my passion. It's where I get my passion from. It's where I get my heart and soul from. My love of culture and music and dance. That all comes from the Greek side of me, which is like, it's just so empowering and so, it's why I'm alive, right? I also get my hard-headedness from being Greek. You know, it's from my dad's side, I always say. And America has given me opportunities that I probably would not have been able to receive in Greece had I been born there, right? America has given me more of an open mind. America has given me my, you know, careers and, you know, my ability to do what I want, when I want, how I want. And for that reason, I probably would not consider repatriating. When I was younger, of course, as most Greek Americans do, we all want to move to Greece because we assume Greece is what it is in the summertime, right? But as I get older, I realize, and as I've lived in Greece in terms of like through my friends and understood the trials and tribulations of living in that part of the world, it's not just Greece. I think as an adult, it would probably frustrate me and it might not be ideal. Unless, of course, I decide to retire there, you know, at a much older age. I think it's different that if you are an immigrant to this country, that burning desire to go home is true. But for someone born here, this is my home. Astoria is my home. New York is my home.
And also, you are very much involved in having an active role within the community. You're also an activist within the community. How you manage that? What drives you as a, you know, to do all these things that you do?
I don't sleep. It's funny because I think I emulate my mom in that. My mom was always very involved in the community and in cultural aspects of the Greek community specifically. She was always involved in the choir and in plays and this sort of thing. So growing up with that kind of a mother inspired me to want to be involved culturally with my Greek community. And then I think being such a good student in the American side inspired me to want to achieve, you know, success in terms of my academics and in terms of my degrees, in terms of my ability to participate in civic and sort of local kind of events. So growing up in an American school with Greek parents, especially my dad, I think for him it was very important to see his children excel in academia, which is, you know, very different from the kind of effect that My Big Fat Greek Wedding had on people, where it seemed that Greek fathers wanted their daughters to get married and take over the family business. That is certainly not the case with my family and with other families I know. My father wanted me to succeed way before I got married to anyone. He was never interested in marrying me off young to have babies, which I really value in terms of having a strict Greek father, you know, and my mom too. They never asked me to ask my brothers to do something that they wouldn't ask me, you know, because I grew up with 3 brothers. And so while it was, you know, I was definitely sheltered because I was a female in terms of socially, I guess, but in terms of schooling and education, my parents were very, very adamant about me succeeding just as much as the boys.
Now that you mention education, you have various degrees and diplomas within a public institution like CUNY, and we're very proud of CUNY since Queen's College is one of the colleges belonging to CUNY.
Yay, CUNY.
Tell us about your experience with CUNY.
I have to be honest, the reason I selected Baruch College as my undergraduate college is because my older brother John went to Baruch, and my parents basically said to me, "You're going to go where your brother goes, you know, so he can have a watch over you." It wasn't that bad, but they really did want me to stay close to home. Greek parents don't allow, when I was growing up, they didn't allow you to apply for out-of-town schools, out-of-state schools, because you basically weren't going, you know. That part was true, that in my Greek household, you stayed home until you got married. You weren't going anywhere else. Thankfully, that wasn't the case for me. But at that point, I wasn't allowed to go to another school, so I had to go to Baruch. And of course, I was interested in business, but I was also very interested in the arts. I knew that I was a very culturally driven, creative type of person. But of course, I was told that, I had to get some kind of a degree in something that would be sustainable, right? So the most creative aspect at Baruch College in business at that time was advertising. So I actually got my undergraduate degree in advertising and marketing communication, business communication. And that was really great for me because I ended up working for an ad agency, and I was on the business aspect of it, but I got to deal with all the creatives and I got to promote their work to the clients. And so that sort of gave me this feeling that I was doing right by the creatives, And so, but it was also a position of presenting, right? I often say that all of my careers thus far have led me to where I am today. So being in advertising, when you're presenting to the clients, you're really on a stage of some sort, And then going back to CUNY, I found this wonderful program at the time when I graduated called the CUNY CAP program. So when I decided to go back to school for my graduate degree, I looked into that program, and what they offered was something that you really couldn't say no to. They offered you a part-time job during the day, and you would go to school at night for your master's degree, and they would supplement your they would supplement your payments. They would help with your tuition. They would supplement your tuition. And so all I had to do was promote going to a CUNY to juniors in high schools. So I had 3 high schools assigned to me, and I would go and I would have seminars with these juniors and explain to them the benefits of going to a CUNY university versus an Ivy League. I would talk about the benefits of being a big fish in a small pond, as opposed to a small fish in a bigger pond, that kind of concept. And in the first semester, 2 of these assistant principals had approached me and asked me if I would like to do this same seminar and deliver it to ESL population. Now, at the time, I had just started my first semester in education. I was going to learn how to teach English as a second language. So this assistant principal specifically asked me if I would be able to present this to the ESL population. I did, and I guess I did it really well because she offered me a job on the spot as an ESL teacher. That's and amazing. So I didn't have to do, student teaching. Mm-hmm. And, right out the gate, I was kind of thrown to the wolves to be a teacher in a high school without ever having a teaching degree. I mean, I was doing it in tandem, but that was quite scary, but also quite fascinating. And I learned how being a teacher, in essence, is also a theater kind of format. You're also on a stage, and you're trying to infuse your knowledge on these kids in the most creative way possible. It couldn't, at that time, the basics didn't work. I was always very creative with my students. And of course that morphed into, from teaching ESL to teaching English literature to teaching. So I tried to be very creative in all of my techniques. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, but that was my second career. But I'm very grateful to the CUNY system because I think I've gotten an incredible education.
And when and how acting occurred as an interest, and how the family responded?
That's a great question. Oh, my big fat Greek family wasn't happy about it. Let me just say that growing up in Greek school and American school, I always had, I guess really big parts in the school plays, and I never wanted to be an actor at a young age. It wasn't like something that I was born with and I was driven, at least not consciously. And that might be because my parents didn't really want me to embark upon any kind of artistic career. They did support me, however, when I did Greek folk dance, for example. I was an expert Greek folk dancer. I loved everything Greek folk dancing and music, and And they allowed that. I did ballet as a young child, you know, well into my teens. But they also didn't want me dancing, you know, in a dance company as a ballerina. No. Greek folk dance was okay, but regular dance, not so much. And then I guess I satisfied their desire when I was in advertising. And then right after advertising, I became a teacher. And then there was a tragedy that happened in my family, and I took some time off. But I ended up working for the governor of New York State, Governor Pataki, again, in a role that would keep me tied to the Greek community. You mentioned that I was an activist or an advocate, I guess. My job within Governor Pataki's office was to represent him and speak on his behalf at various ethnic events. So mostly those, I'd say 80% of those events were Greek events. And then there were some other cultures that I dealt with too, but predominantly Greek and Cypriot events. And so that sort of began my foray into not only the cultural aspects of Greece and Greek Americans, but also sort of what was happening in motherland Greece, the political aspects, you know, the Cyprus tragedy. I learned everything about the Cyprus tragedy, Andy Komodromos, anyway, and many other wonderful Cypriot men took me under their wings and explained the Cyprus invasion of 1974 to me. And I learned about, you know, the Asia Minor catastrophe, which I also learned about these things, periferiaka, like on the outskirts, you know, in my time in Greek school. But there's only so much you can learn as an elementary school student about that kind of history, you know. And so I began learning more and more as I worked in the governor's office, as I met various kinds of Greeks, different kinds of Greeks. Phil Hellenes would teach me a lot. And I would speak on the governor's behalf, and I realized that, oh my God, later in life, that too was setting the stage for something else, right? So after I worked in the governor's office, and then September 11th happened, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But September 11th changed the world. It changed my life. And subsequently thereafter, I had to do something else. And I, quite honestly, stumbled upon acting. I went to a Greek theater performance, a tiny little Greek theater that existed in Astoria, the Greek Cultural Center, and I watched the final performance of a play all in Greek with a dear friend of mine, and they mentioned something about the next performance. And I somehow leaned over to my friend and I said, you know, I've never performed in a Greek play in Astoria. And she looked at me and she said, great, I'm putting you in the next one. And I said, but I'm not an actor. I can't be in a play, you know? And she said, oh, you will, and you'll be great. And that's how it happened. Ioanna Xanthopoulou put me in her play that was performed at the Archdiocese Greek Hellenic Cultural Center in Astoria. It was a Molière play, so it was a French play translated to Greek, okay? O γιατρός με το ζόρι. The doctor in spite of himself. And that was the very first time where I was actually on a stage with an audience as an adult. You know, it wasn't a school play. And I remember being very nervous about it because it was all in Greek. And I also remember being nervous about remembering my lines, or it was a comedy. Are people going to think I was funny? How is that going to work? But when I got on stage and the lights were on and the people were laughing, somehow like this flame, I can't explain it any other way, turned on inside me. And I thought, oh my God, I have to do this. And I took classes and studied and found coaches and started to begin to learn the craft of acting, which is like this big onion. And you just keep peeling aside and learning more and learning more. And there's so much more to learn. And I continue now to learn about being an actor and to perfect my craft. Were my parents happy about it? They were not, especially because I came from this prestigious job working for the governor. My poor dad, may he rest in peace, would say to me, "So you don't work at the governor's office anymore?" It made him so proud that I worked for the governor. And I said, "Baba, it's okay. It's okay." But then when he also started hearing rumblings about how good his daughter was on stage, he also felt very proud for that. And, you know, at that point, I was 36 years old. Did I mention that? I started acting at a very late stage in my life, which is really good because this is a perfect time to say it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to recreate yourself, to do something that you love. And that's what I did. And that's how I'm here today.
Yeah. But as you describe, we see two things here. On
Yes.
one hand, you are a private person and you have your private life and personal, but at the same time, through your various jobs and careers you had, you are a people's person.
Oh.
So do you think this is part of being Greek, this combination of the inner and the outer, the inside and the outside?
I think that, so when you mean inner, like the inner calm, the inner quiet, the private person, yeah. I think a lot of my friends and family will tell you that Anthula is a complete extrovert, right? Which is different than being, I'm not an introvert, which is different from having a private side. Greeks in general, whether you're born in Greece or you're born in another country, if you have that Greek blood coursing through your veins, it is very rare that I meet a Greek person who isn't passionate about something, passionate in their lives in general. I happen to be a case that is a person who is very passionate, not just about the things that I'm doing in my life, but I'm passionate about people. I'm passionate about helping others. My parents were extremely generous people. And don't forget, my father came to this country with absolutely nothing in his pocket. And I watched them as I grew up. I watched them and their kindness and their generosity, not just to Greek people, to everybody that they came across. There was some kind of a love opposite their fellow man, and that I found extremely rewarding. Like, it made me so proud to know that my dad, who might have $2 in his pocket, would be willing to give away one of those dollars to help someone who is in a, you know, more compromised position than he was in. In terms of being private and public, Nico, I don't think I'm that private. I mean, I think that I have some things that are personal and not to be shared, and there's a handful of friends that are my tight-knit people. But I've kind of learned to just sort of put myself out there and kind of meet people and love people and embrace people and things and animals. And I think that's one of my best qualities, you know, like the way I can walk down the street and talk to a person who's walking their dog, or walk into a supermarket or a department store, and people find it very strange when they're wearing a name tag, you know, and I say, you know, "Hi, Joseph," you know, and he'll say, "Wait, how do you know me? Have we met before?" And I'm like, "No, but your name is Joseph. It's written," you know, and they find that so wonderful that someone will engage with them in a way that isn't just transactional. And I think that's a very Greek thing. I think Greeks are so philoxeni, which is hospitable, right? They make friends with strangers, right? Philoxenos, I think, is the right translation. I might be wrong. They're also philotimi. They honor their friends. And I know there are other types of people, so I'm just speaking who are like that. But I'm just speaking in terms of what I've come across in the Greek community.
This is very interesting what you say. For many reasons in many levels. One level or one thing is that at this moment the Earth's population is about 8 billion people, which is a lot of people.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the number one problem we have is isolation and loneliness. So what you just said, it is breaking through that, and I'm glad that you identify that as a serious issue to communicate with human beings and animals and nature in general. In sociology, there is a masterpiece, a book that we also teach at CUNY and Queen's College in particular, which is called The Sociological Imagination by an American sociologist, C.W. Mills. And he talks about when a personal trouble becomes a public issue. It is when the human condition of an individual is also the human condition of society.
Of society, yeah.
And I want to use that bridge and talk about the personal issue, which was the tragedies that came close to each other and change many things for you, the family, the community.
Yeah, it changed my world forever. Changed who I am forever.
And how difficult it was to bring that out within the community, within your family.
You know, Nico, I just want to say one thing that you say about the problem of isolation. It's incredible how COVID has exacerbated that issue. I'm sure it existed before, but now it's, you know, has elevated and increased over time because of that feeling of isolation. You know, we spoke about this before, how Greeks, you know, need to have this relationship with nature and be outdoors, you know, as opposed to at home glued to a TV, and happily luckily I should say, growing up in Astoria in the 70s and the 80s, I had that opportunity to be a child and to run and to play and be outdoors with my friends, as opposed to the children of today, unfortunately, who are stuck behind or adults too, who are stuck behind their phones all day. You know, there were two tragedies that hit our family. And I'll take the first one as it happened in the order, and I'll take them in the order in which they happened. And it's quite interesting how, I guess, the first tragedy sort of, for lack of a better word, I guess, prepared us for the second. We were 4 kids growing up. My oldest brother's name was George. My second brother was John. I was the third, and Michael was the fourth. We all grew apart. We were apart 1 to 2 years the most. So we grew up very, very close. My youngest brother, Michael, was the baby of the family. And I can only describe Michael as a, you know, compassionate, very kind soul who grew up to be this very, very smart individual. He was very good with numbers. He was an accountant. He was very good with statistics. He was very kind of alert and very smart and charismatic, and kind of a thinker. I would say he was the one in our family who was the most, the person who thought the most. So when Michael took his own life, it was very hard for us as a family to reconcile with that and to understand, you know, the why. Michael was 25 years old. I was 26. And he was troubled. And it's so funny because I don't think when you're in it, as close as we were and as loving as we were as a family, I guess we just didn't see it. Maybe we didn't want to see it. Maybe we didn't think it could happen. Michael was, if I had to say, he was never clinically diagnosed, but if I had to say in retrospect, he had a mental illness. And that led him to take his own life in May of 1999. Today is actually the 23rd year in which this happened. And the only reason I mention that is because 23 years doesn't make it hurt less, you know. It doesn't make you miss them less. I miss my brother tremendously. I am saddened by the fact that I didn't get to experience him in the last 23 years, to see what kind of a man he would have become, and that makes me sad. But I just want to take it back a notch to the fact that Michael committed suicide. And it is very hard for people in the Greek community to utter those words without feeling guilty or embarrassed or worried about what will people think of that action. My mom was very worried about the notion of whether or not the Greek Orthodox Church would give him a proper burial, because we all know that suicide is, quote, a sin. And I have to say, as a credit to the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and to the Archbishop at the time, they did not see it as that, as a sin. They saw it as an illness, that Michael was sick. He didn't sin. And that's why they in fact did give him a proper burial, which I thought was quite wonderful. And but I found it very interesting that, you know, it was sort of like not talked about to a certain level. It was sort of whispered about, you know, in around the corner where people weren't hearing. Oh, did you hear how it happened? You know, did you hear why it happened? And that got me thinking that, you know, in order, because I didn't know anybody in my life that had ever committed suicide. I had no relationship with this kind of mental illness. And so because I know how awful it was to have been left, you know, while it might have brought him some relief, it brought us this tremendous amount of concern and worry and why and questions and questions and questions. And I didn't want anybody else to go through with that. So when you mentioned that I was an activist, you know, for cultural events, I then became an activist and a kind of a spokesperson, if you will, for mental illness awareness and suicide prevention. Because I thought it was very important that we stop this. Because what people don't understand is that suicide is one of the leading killers in young people. And it begins at age 25, where something happens to their brains. So I needed to talk about it. I needed to tell people. I never hid how Michael died.
Although that was considered a taboo within the community.
It was very taboo within the community.
The latest statistics show that during the pandemic, suicide rates among the youth increased
tremendously. Yeah, that goes along with the loneliness, the feeling of loneliness, you know, and the belief that, you know, there is no hope, you know. And God knows during COVID we all felt that, which is why I find it, you know, ridiculous that there isn't more funding that goes towards mental illness awareness, you know. I think that some things have changed over the years, and I'm glad about that. But I think more needs to be done.
We saw that with American athletes, that, you know, they got so many medals, and although they have such, you know, glory and fame, at the same time they were brave enough to follow your steps and open and make it more public and bring awareness.
But you're right. It takes a lot. You have to be courageous and brave to open that up. and explain to people and not worry about what is that person going to think of me. And the complete opposite happened. When I would open up and talk about my brother's suicide, I was flooded with, oh my God, thank you for sharing that. And they would share stories with me. And again, it opens that communication among people so that we can grow and better ourselves as a society by helping one another. So that was incredibly important for me. But that's not why I became an actor. I took time off. I was still working at the governor's office. And then September 11th happened. And I remember I got a call. I was in bed because I had worked late the night before, and the governor allowed us to sleep in after events. My cousin had called me from Greece because obviously they were watching the events unfold. And I didn't quite understand what she was babbling about, but then I turned on my TV and I got a call from my boss at the office who said, don't come in, don't come in. I didn't really understand what was happening. I saw the building that was hit. And then my older brother called and said, you need to come to Mom's and Dad's because John worked in one of those buildings. Now, my brother John, who was the second born, worked on Wall Street. That's what I knew. He worked on Wall Street. Wall Street's a big place. But I didn't know where his office was located. So I walked to my mom's, which was only a few blocks away. And Nico, I have to tell you, the day was one of these like gorgeous, sunny, blue sky days, and I'll never forget it. But I really didn't think much of it. And when I got home, that's when I when I got to my mom's, I understood that something terrible had happened. And my brother was in Tower 1 on the 104th floor. He worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, which was the company that lost all of its employees. He was trapped, in essence, because they couldn't make it to the roof, and the impact of the airplane was below them. Now, John was only 31 years old, and he didn't go to work the Monday before 9/11. He didn't go to work on September 10th. He had taken that day off. But he went to work on September 11th and never came home. And we really had hope for a very long time. And this is the interesting thing about how people came together as a people. If you want to talk about sociology, it was this unbelievable sense of community and love that had transpired. I mean, I am so sad about my brother John's loss and the loss of nearly 3,000 people that day, and even the I'm sad for my city and my state and my country. But I often talk about September 12th, Nico, because September 12th is where I got to see almost the best of humanity that I've ever seen in my life. So September 11th was tragic, but September 12th and the days in the aftermath were so humbling, because I got support from places that I never expected. Complete strangers would stop in front of our house because they would see a group of people standing on the corner smoking cigarettes, chatting, and they would say, "Is everything okay?" And we would say, "We're looking for my brother John." And they would say, "How can we help?" And they would come with us to search or offer us food or bring us a blanket. Complete strangers. Okay, forget what the family and friends did for us, So, and the fact that 9/11 was such a big public loss, really kind of explains how everyone came together, because it was a loss that everyone had experienced. And so I'm grieving for my brother, but you are grieving for me, who's grieving for my brother.
This is the,
I'm sorry,
the universality of the loss. And although I know how difficult it is, I'm very pleased. At least we want to commemorate Michael and John in this interview. And as long as we remember them, they are still with us.
Nico, it's taking me 23 years, since Michael died, and 22, I guess, since John died, to really understand that statement. Because in the beginning, of course, you go through all sorts of different feelings, and you go through the grief stage, you go through the anger stage, you go through the why me stage.
Guilt, yeah.
The guilt. How did this happen? Why didn't I save Michael? How could I have done something differently? Yeah. And then you realize that the more you bring them to your lips and the more you talk about them, the more they stay with you. And I honestly believe that I have angels, without sounding spiritual or woo-woo, I honestly do believe that my brothers are always with me. And the more I engage and the more I talk to people about them, I feel like I bring them alive. I know people for 20 years that I have conversed about my brother John for 20 years, because they work on the rebuilding on 9/11 and we've worked on it together, who have said to me, I've never met your brother, but I feel like I know him just from all your stories. And I think that is really quite beautiful. And it really makes me feel that I am honoring their memory and
yes.
doing something good in their memory.
And we want to do that. And I'm glad that you mentioned angels, because as a poet, Rilke has this, great poem, the Duido Elegies, which is about angels. So.
Oh, will you send that to me?
Yes.
Okay.
So you do fine. It is it is exactly what you just said. I still have, and I carry it with me, and I will always carry that, this experience I had with you. And I know that it is a bit unorthodox as doing an official interview to express all of this, but in this case, it doesn't matter if I'm not a good interviewer.
You're a great interviewer. Go ahead.
But I carry this experience with you, the theatrical, the artistic experience, which was very emotional, and also brought me to another level of understanding and receiving what you said about solidarity. And it was a play, it was a room full of people who, after your performance, nobody could move for a while. We all stayed for some time in our seats, and it was the moment when you concluded your performance of your play that you wrote and you performed, about having this personal tragedy, that you brought it as a public issue, but anybody can do that. Not many people can do that as an art. How you transform this private issue
and made it so very public,
and make it also art.
I see what you mean. Yeah, it's not easy, Nico. And let's see, 2001, I think the very first time I actually thought about doing something like this. I became an actor, I guess, in 2007. So I don't think I performed this show until 2014, I think was the first time I performed it. So some time had passed, to say the least. So I think that, as I said, there are moments where you need time to grieve. You need time to be angry. You need time to deny. You need time, to sort of adjust to life without your loved one. But since I had become an actor, which I think was quite cathartic for me, and really sort of the way my life was kind of forcing me all the while, I just never saw it. As an actor, I found a freedom that I hadn't had before, and perhaps it's also because I became an actor later in life. So I wasn't sheltered anymore by my parents and their ideas of how I should live and what I should be. So because I became an actor later in life, I found that there was a way that I could express myself that I had never been able to do before. And so I didn't know that writing an autobiographical solo play about, the things that had happened in my life, autobiographical, was actually going to go as far as I did in terms of, being this, taking a very private, personal issue and putting it out there for the public. I didn't know, that wasn't what my intention was. My intention as an actor was to put myself out there, and perhaps someone will see me, and perhaps I'll get, more jobs, right? Which is a very business-like way of thinking. I never, ever, ever understood that this play was going to have such an incredible impact on people and on myself, on my audience and on myself. As I started writing it, I thought, I really do want to talk about Michael, but I can't talk about Michael without explaining what happened to him. And because I was so fired up about being this, person that spoke about suicide prevention and mental illness awareness instead of hiding from it, I knew that I had to talk about that. And then once I talked about that, I said, well, how can I not talk about John and 9/11 and that entire experience? And so it started to, as I wrote it, and it was extremely painful as I was going through the motions of writing it, to relive all of those moments. And I have to be honest with you, you say I turned it into art. Yes, that was incredibly difficult, because I remember the very first time I did a snippet, I did 20 minutes in front of in a very protected space with a protected audience, small audience, sort of as a workshop. I remember that when I did it, the entire audience was overwhelmed with concern for ANTHOULA. Not ANTHOULA the actor, but ANTHOULA. Look what ANTHOULA's going through. She's going to have a nervous breakdown up there. They were really, really concerned, because I did. When I first performed this, I couldn't contain my passion and my sadness and my grief. I was all over the place. So it took many years, believe it or not, before you saw it, to be able to hone in and make sure that ANTHOULA, the person, the actor, was performing the role of ANTHOULA, who lost her brother on 9/11, whose brother committed suicide. And I know it's kind of hard, because you're like, well, you're the same person. But I had to make sure that I was protecting myself as much as the audience, because I never want the audience to worry about me, right? So that's a very kind of an actor's thing. We want the audience to, I don't need to cry to have the audience cry, right? There's a very specific, technique that, like, just by being real and authentic, and that's what I tried to do. I tried to be as real and authentic as I could, and that's what had its impact on people. And I realized from people approaching me afterwards that what I spoke about really had a lot of impact universally on different races, different cultures, different age groups, different genders. Everyone sort of had something to say that made me really think about what I had done. And I don't need to tell you this, but every time I went home and fell asleep, I felt like a truck had hit me, right? Because, you end up giving so much of yourself. But at the end, I got the opportunity to perform that, because it is about expression, and that's really why I did it at the end of the day. That's really what I got out of it, was that this was the best way of expressing myself, because once you wake up from feeling like a truck has hit you, there's a bit of calm, You sleep and you're calm and you're like, I've emptied myself from the pain and the hardship, and now I'm calm until the next night, where you have to do it all over again. Did I answer your question?
Oh, yes. And then the next, for me at least, tremendous thing was your collaboration with one of the most important American and Greek American actresses like Olympia Dukakis. And I remember in an interview she gave and how much she loved you and what you meant to her. It wasn't just a collaboration of two actresses of the same descent.
Right, descent, yeah.
I think it was more than that. Tell us about this.
Oh my God, Olympia Dukakis. Oh, that woman. I'm so sad. I miss her so much. She was really a mentor and I would like to say like a mom figure or a grandmother figure person in my life. I received advice from Olympia that I would never receive from my own mom, you know. I met Olympia at a Greek workshop, at a workshop for the Greeks, like the Greek tragedies, where I definitely had to meet Olympia Dukakis. And I remember I did, for obvious reasons, my piece that I did in class was a monologue from Electra. And you know, I went out there, I was very young, and I went out like very kind of new to acting, and I, you know, gushed, you know, the pain that just came out of me, and it went back to that, what I said before, that I was really like crying and hysterical and beating my chest. And she said, no, Anthula, no. You know, she just sort of made me like hone it in and kind of internalize the pain, which was so much more effective, right, than bleh, you know, spilling it all out there. So I remember thinking, God, this woman's smart. And I remember thinking, you know, wow, she's my inspiration. I want to be just like Olympia Dukakis. And I was like 36, you know. And then at that same workshop, I noticed that she was being videotaped. And so I approached the gentleman with the camera, and he said he was from the island of Cyprus. And I started speaking in my Cypriot dialect, because Cypriots have a different dialect. And I had gone to college, Queen's College, with a lot of Cypriot men, so I had learned that dialect. And he was kind of taken aback, and we became friends. And that gentleman was Harry Mavromichalis, who was the filmmaker for Olympia's documentary, which is simply called Olympia. As I became friends with Harry and slowly became friends with Olympia while taking more of her courses and, you know, kind of being involved with her on various degrees. You know, I met her through Greg Pappas at the Greek America Foundation. So there were very many ways that the universe was bringing Olympia and myself together. And we both thought that there was a reason we were being put together, you know. And I will always remember her because of the fond way she would look at me. She would look at me like I was her child, you know, the way a mother would look at a child. And I could feel, she had these unbelievably telling eyes. I could feel her love, you know, beaming on me. Plus, she was an unbelievable mentor in terms of acting, you know, and it was incredible to watch her work and to have listened to her, to have her teach me. And the closer I got to her, the more I learned about the documentary, and the more I couldn't help want to help. So before you know it, I was doing things, and Harry looked at me and he says, I think you're the producer of this film, you know. And so I ended up becoming the executive producer, one of the executive producers of the film. You can go to olympiathefilm.com and check it out. We're streaming everywhere. I'm very proud of the film because the beauty of what Harry has done is he has shown you an inside look to Olympia Dukakis, who she was as a human being, as a person, as a mom, as a woman, not just as an Oscar award-winning actress, which I think is something that documentaries like, you know, about people, biopics don't normally do. And so I would encourage everyone, if you want to get an inside look into Olympia's life and see the woman that I saw, you should see the film. Yeah, she will always be a source of inspiration for me. I feel like her. I do. My short hair now, I kind of feel like her.
It was very obvious how how she felt when she was talking about you, and I thought this is wonderful. But also, it is now the question: theater or film?
Oh my goodness!
Because you have an extended career also, participating
really
in films, in TV series, etc. Do you see any difference? Is something that you?
Oh my God, there's a huge difference. Go ahead.
It is? How so?
Oh, Nico, it's such a big difference. I remember the very first film I ever did, the very first time I was ever on camera for an official film was actually a Greek director, Panos Karkanevatos. And it was a film that he had shot in Nisiros. It was called Athanasia Παλιά Κρυμμένα Μυστικά, Greek. And I played an American school teacher. And he had given me this role because we became friends in Nisiros, and I begged him for a role. And here I am for the first time, just fresh out of acting school, and I have this director, and he's talking to me, and I am playing the role of the teacher like this, right? Because I'm trying to reach the back corner of the street. And poor Pano said to me, Anthula, smaller, smaller. And I was like, I don't understand. I'm such a big personality. What do you mean smaller? Τα μάτια σου. He would say, your eyes expresses everything. You're so animated just by standing there. You know, you don't have to speak loud. You don't have to project, you know. And that was sort of my first because he would show me what it looks like on camera. And then I understood the difference between projecting really loud to a camera. Because when I originally started, it was just about theater. I didn't really know what it looked like on film. So when you say theater or film, they're two very different mediums. Like you said, like we just said, the film and TV has to be very quiet, not quiet, soft-spoken, but, you know, more internalized. It's more like your expressions. You don't need to move a lot because the camera picks up a lot. I didn't know that. And then stage is where you're freed up a little bit to be a little more, use your body and to use your voice and to be able to project to the back row and this kind of thing. What's also very different about film and theater is the fact that, you know, on stage, you do it this way, this time, that's it, you're done. And whatever the audience got. Tomorrow night, you're going to do it a completely different way, you know, depending on what happens. It changes, right? It's revolving. Whereas film, you do take after take after take until you get it right. And that to me is a little boring. Not boring, it's just different, you know. I just feel so much more alive on a stage. So don't make me choose, because I kind of like doing both, you know. I love being on a stage, but I've been fortunate enough to work in film and on TV with some very incredible legendary actors, and I feel like I've learned so much from them. I honestly am so blessed to have received the roles that I have gotten. They've just been, you know, small roles, but in big films opposite big actors.
Let's mention some names.
Would you like me to mention some names?
Please.
So the very first...
Because you have some memorable and my favorite scenes in various activities you had, either TV or films.
Well, I have to tell you, the first film after that, the Greek film, the first American film, blockbuster hit, I guess. Well, it wasn't a blockbuster hit, but it was an American film. It was called Taking Woodstock. And Taking Woodstock was the film that Ang Lee directed after Brokeback Mountain. So it really didn't get a lot of traction, but it was a beautiful quality film where I played the sister of Dimitri Martin, who at that time was a comedian, stand-up comedian, and Ang had seen him and thought he would be perfect for the lead role. And here's a little story about sociology that you might be interested in. I accidentally met the casting director for that film. And it was just a conversation that was about to take place between the two of us. And she was Jewish, a New York Jew, and I was a New York Greek. And we talked about, eventually, how similar we are. And she said to me, you know what? I actually just cast a Greek actor to play a Jewish character. And then like a light bulb went off in her head, and she ran into her office and she came back and she handed me a script and said, I don't know if you have any talent, but you could play this guy's sister in the film because he was Greek and I was Greek. And wouldn't you know it, that's the part I got. And that was within 6 months of me becoming an actor. And I thought, well, this is easy. But anyway, it wasn't that easy after that. But I got to play this role. And here's another thing you have to understand. On set, Ang Lee. Myself, Dimitri Martin. That was the day that Dimitri Martin decided to bring his mom and Yaya to the set. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 of us. And the executive producer of the film was also Greek. So she was there. So there were 5 Greeks on this pretty incredible set, you know, with Ang Lee. And I thought that was marvelous. I thought it was a sign, you know. So I've worked with Dimitri. I've worked, you know, subsequently thereafter with Robert De Niro and Michelle Pfeiffer. I've actually worked with them twice on the film The Family. And then I worked with them on the Bernie Madoff HBO series, Wizard of Lies. Again, small roles. But I have to tell you, when I saw Michelle Pfeiffer for the second time on the second film, you know, you don't speak to Michelle Pfeiffer unless you're spoken to. I'm very professional. But at some point during one of our breaks, she just kept looking at me. And she said, "I'm sorry, but don't I know you?" And I thought that was such an incredible compliment. I said, "Yeah, we work together in The Family." She said, I knew you from somewhere," which I thought was really a wonderful compliment, you know. So that was wonderful. I worked with Rose Byrne for quite some time on a film. She was wonderful. I feel like I worked with a lot of people. I've been on Law and Order several times, and that other criminal procedural drama called FBI, you know, so as a guest star. So, you know, film has been wonderful to me. I really want to do more films. I would love to do a film in Greece. Shot in Greece, that would be a dream come true. But I still leave room for theater, because I think theater is really kind of...
And as I said in the very beginning of our interview, is that you have so many talents and titles, so we cover some of them. But also I would like to mention, besides your beautiful facial expression, your body expression, also it is your voice.
Ah, my voice. Yes, this voice. I don't know who gave me this, my mom or my dad. I'm not sure. It's funny that you say that, because during COVID, when we were all isolated, I was very fortunate to turn a linen closet into a soundproof booth. And with the help of my wonderful agent, I ended up doing voiceover work to help get me through the pandemic. And that was wonderful, because I didn't know I had a voice. Because truth be told, when I started acting, I tried to take singing lessons. And my singing teacher and I both agreed that that was not a good idea. But for voiceover, it's great. Is that what you were alluding to, my voiceover career?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not very easy, because I know various actors who do that, either comedians or other people. And they say that it is as hard as playing a role that people can see you.
It's extremely hard. It's actually harder, because you are in a booth, or you are staring in front of a microphone. You might have some context on a screen in front of you, but you can easily get into your head. You know, you're listening to your voice, which sounds different than if you weren't listening to your voice, you know. And, you know, people say to me all the time, I have a great voice. People say I should go into voiceovers. And I very quickly tell them, no, you should not, unless you're an actor. Because it's not about the sound of your voice on a rough scale. It's about how you can manipulate your voice to fit that which you are talking about. It is very different for me to do a commercial about baby diapers, is very different than doing a commercial for, you know, hospitals, you know, or detergent, you know, or prudential, you know, financial services. So you have to be an actor, like a chameleon, to be able to, you know, manipulate your voice and change your voice in such a way that acts along with the script. It is a script. You need to act it out, not just read some lines with your great voice. You know, so it is a talent that has to be cultivated. And I'm still cultivating it. I'm not where I want to be yet,
Which reminds me, how closely is this to ancient Greek tragedies, where they had the masks, and it was only the voice that really mattered there. It is, you are naked, you are you.
Yeah, because you're invisible, technically,
yes,
right? Because
yes,
you
yes.
know.
And what really is your body at this moment?
Right, so that's different. So now using your body on a stage with I don't know how, I would love to try that. Yes. You know, how it's not about your facial expressions any longer. It really is about your voice and your body, how your body moves.
Does it make any difference to you when you play, let's say, a Greek tragedy and you say it in English, or you rather wanted to say it in Greek?
Oh my goodness.
Does that matter to you? The language matters, or it is other things that really important to you, how you play a Greek tragedy, a Greek play in America?
I think you're right. I think that, first of all, it depends on what you're doing, right? But if it is Greek tragedy, although the Greek language, I mean, first and foremost, it's so much richer than the American language. And, you know, to be able to do it in Greek, where you can really understand the depth of the pain or the anguish or whatever it is that is being talked about, is one thing where I think Greek is first and foremost paramount. But, you know, it's really hard to do it in Greek when you're speaking to an American audience, right? So, plus, if it's in a Greek language that there are words that I don't understand, you know, actually the way I would do it is I would probably perform it in English, but I would have to read it in Greek to understand exactly the nuances of this translation. It would have to be an incredible translation. Because I read Greek so fluently and I understand it, I've done this in the past. I've played Andromachi with Eclipsis, right? I needed to read the Greek in order to really understand it before I could recite it in English. But because my first language is English, I would feel most comfortable in English. But only after having read it in Greek. So I could understand the slight nuances to whatever it was, you know, to the real script, the original script.
The film industry has changed tremendously. It's a different era. It's not longer the studio, something else, the other things. And recently there is a strike of the writers.
Good for the writers.
Guild.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that we're actually deciding now, the actors are deciding whether or not we should go on strike to support the writers. And I think we're probably going to end up doing that. I think that these big studios, big corporations have gone absolutely crazy. And it's a complete, like, it's just disrespectful to not pay for what they're receiving. They sit in their corner offices, you know, and they make money off of these wonderful writers, and yet they won't commit to giving them a full-time job or a full-time salary, or at least pay them what they're worth and what they deserve, you know, and be able to then help younger writers come on board to learn the craft, where instead they're talking about AI and all this artificial, which is the exact word. It is artificial. It is not authentic. So yeah, the industry is a little up and down these days, and it makes me very sad, which makes me want to do theater. But anyway.
Even some former actresses did some research, and books came out, but also have official statistics that female actors are paid less or differently than males. How difficult is to be a female in this kind of industry, of occupation? You know,
I think at my level, I'm not at that level where I see a difference in the pay raise. I'm still at the sort of beginning stages, but I've read the same research that, you know, female A-listers are paid less than male A-listers, which I just think is ludicrous in any industry. That this still exists in 2023 is just bizarre. But you know, I think the thing with female, the difference that I see besides the pay disparity is the way they're treated, you know, almost like, you know, you have to worry about the whole sexual industry, you know, the Me Too movement and you know, being taken advantage of this way. And if you're too kind, a person like me is so kind, so open, you know, it might be taken, misconstrued. So I have to be very careful when I'm on a set as to how I speak and how I present myself, for fear of someone else saying, oh, she instigated this, you know. So that's something that I'm conscious of. I think in general, the older I get, I think the good news is that they are creating more roles for females. Usually the protagonists have always been males, but now you see a lot more female-driven protagonist roles in films, and directors and producers. So that keeps me hopeful.
One or two suggestions, I don't want to say advice, that you like to say to a young female actor or male actor now, that they think, because at CUNY and at Queen's College, in our classes, we have people who are majoring in theater or film.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you know, they ask questions, but I'm not an expert, so I would like to document an advice from an expert.
I don't know if I'm an expert. It's very hard for me to say that.
But you're a person who
yes,
you know,
who's worked
who
and
works
who's aware.
Yeah.
You know what? I should actually start this off by saying not to do what I just did. I'm not an expert. You know, anything you accomplish is an accomplishment, and you should be proud of that. You know, like, there are people out there who haven't worked with Robert De Niro, and I have. And so, yeah, that's an accomplishment. So I would advise younger actors to really be proud of anything that they do. Anytime they put themselves out there in any kind of film or theater production or whatever, as long as you're doing your craft, then that's an accomplishment. And be proud of that and never put yourself down, number one. Number two, love what you're doing. From the minute you no longer love what you're doing, just stop. Because you're not going to enjoy it. You're going to end up hating it. You know, so just make sure you still love what you're doing. And what I find to help me when I get into my little points where I'm like, ugh, I remind myself of why I got into this business to begin with. I remind myself of my mentors, Olympia Dukakis, my inspiration, what films inspired me to want to be in film. You know, what were the reasons that I decided to be an actor? Kind of think about those and sit with that for a while. And if they're still meaningful, then continue and put yourself in a class, so that if you're just sitting around because there's nothing going on and your phone's not ringing and you're not working, well, this is a perfect time to work on your craft. I know actors who are really huge stars who are still taking acting classes, because what it does is it allows you to continue tuning your instrument, your body, your mind. We are our own instruments. And if you're in a class, then you're constantly working on your craft and you're tuning your instrument and you're playing and you're acting. And that's what you love to do. So why not do it? Those are my 3 bits of advice that I would give.
Today, which is May 27th, are the last days of your personal freedom. And I would like us to share some of the events that brought this situation up. And I would like to hear how you met your future husband, the lucky person who was really very persistent, from what I know about this.
Okay, quick story. I am getting married on June 25th. I am marrying Michael Papajohn, who I met when I was 48 years old. 48. There is still hope to meet the love of your life, your soulmate, even at 48 years old. And I am getting married at 51. So again, it is never too late. We met at a church out east, at a Greek church. I was speaking to the priest's wife, engaged in a conversation. Michael interrupted, and the priest's wife said, "Wait your turn." And he said, "I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to her," which I thought was really cute. But also I was kind of annoyed because I didn't want to date anyone at the time. So I was introduced. We shared a few words, and I kindly excused myself. Long story short, he ends up sitting at my table for the rest of the night. And apparently we flirted with one another. I did not flirt. He must have been the one flirting. And we had a little bit too much to drink, and he offered to drive me home. And I suggested that was not a good idea, because where would he go after he drove me home? And so I said to him, in not so many nice words, that he wasn't my type, that I wasn't interested in dating a man who didn't speak Greek. Even though he was Greek American, I also had a problem in my head with, well, how am I going to communicate with him? Even though my first language is English. Do you know what I mean? But it's that thing that kept being drilled in, you know. And what I love about Michael is that although he is not fluent in the Greek language, he is so passionate about his culture and about his roots and about being Greek. Anyway, so Michael, mysteriously, unbeknownst to me, had taken my phone during our lovely conversation and had sent himself a text message from my phone. So he had my number, and he continued to persist and to, you know, kind of called me and insisted that that he take me to dinner, and he did. And yeah, the rest is history. I fell in love with someone who, quote, wasn't my type, which really means that there is no type, folks. That's really what
This is a wonderful story.
Yeah.
Is marriage a serious issue nowadays? Do you still think that you know, marriage is something that young people do, or the future generation will do?
I mean, I don't. You know, I'm 51 years old, and it took me this long to get married. And
no, I want to say, of course, it is love, and probably, and I'm sure that for Michael it was a love at first sight. It is obvious.
Thank you.
But in modern times, in an era that is so much uncertainty, what is the thing that brings two people together and they're willing to share the good and the bad?
You're right. With all the uncertainty in the world and all the kind of, the new ways of finding a date or a partner, it seems to be much more difficult these days to find a partner. You know, one wonders, why should I bother getting married? I've gotten that question a lot. Well, you're 51. Why would you bother getting married? You know, just live together or whatnot. At the risk of sounding a little too religious, I actually believe in the covenant of marriage and the sacrament of marriage, just because I went to Sunday school for 11 years. But beyond that, I think what drives me to want to have a partner is that desire that you said, to be able to share my happiness and my sadness with someone. You know, I can, you know, in the morning and at night, to be able to, like, you know, perhaps spend the day apart because we all have our individual lives, but then we come together in the morning and the evening to kind of share things. And in terms of speaking about, you know, the loneliness in the world, I think it is of the utmost importance that you have someone in your life that you can talk to. And I'm all about having a dog, right? I have dogs, I have cats, I'm obsessed, I'm an animal person. But there's something that you share with another human being that, you know, transcends being alone with an animal, right? You know, I say Michael fell in love at first sight, and it took me maybe a little longer to get there. But what ended up, and not that long, but what ended up happening is I truly understood that this person opposite me cares for me so much more than I even care about myself. Who wouldn't want that in their lives? Do you know what I mean? And maybe this is a sort of mature or older perspective, and maybe a 31-year-old would say, oh, you're crazy. Because I know now today, the technology wasn't there when I was 31, but women in their 30s are now freezing their eggs, right? Because they know that someday they may want kids. They don't know, but they're going to make sure they freeze their eggs just in case. And they're certain that they don't want to be married now. Whereas, you know, if you were getting married at 51, or 31, you were a spinster at that point, right? Back in the day in the Greek world. My mother got married at 27, and that was considered old. And in general, I think, in general, not just the Greek culture, many cultures, were married at a younger age. But I think the world was a lot more innocent at that time, and I think the world is so much more complicated today where, women want to be successful. They want to work. There are these two, these households that are driven by two incomes, which is fine. I don't think we should, restrict women from working just to go back to what we used to have, where women take care of the children and whatnot. But I do, in my opinion, believe that there should be, just a companion for everyone. As opposed to just being able to wing it alone. I think it's just a lot harder. So.
This is a nice message.
Because love is love is love.
This is a nice message.
It's because love is love, right? And you can love yourself and love someone else and make sure they love you, and it just equals more love. Who wouldn't want that? You know what I mean? That's I think the message. Love.
All the best. Happiness. Forever.
Αμέσως.
Αμέσως ζηλιάρης.
Ναι, αυτός ήταν ο Πασάς και μετά ήρθε ο μικρός.
Τι γίνεται εδώ πέρα. Τι γίνεται εδώ πέρα σου λέει. Και εγώ θέλω χαλάκια. Έχει σήμερα.
Αυτό το παιδάκι το σώσαμε από την Αντίγκα. Αντίγκα. Τον βρήκα έξω από το δωμάτιό μου όταν πρώτο πήγα, 7 μέρες vacation και κάθε μέρα του βάζα νιοσπόρ.
Κοίτα, αυτός ο ηθοποιός, κοίτα.
Α, πρώτη κάμερα.
Κοίτα πόσα, είναι απίστευτος. Έτσι την καημένα, το βρήκατε εκεί πέρα.
Το βρήκαμε εκεί πέρα και το πέραμε σπίτι.